for a little bit. Not that you're walking in, but that I was going to do a whole lot of talking this morning. And I don't think I'm built for that type of class. So thank you guys for joining us. Like I said, we'll be in Matthew 22, 1 through 14 as we continue on the hard teachings or preachings of Jesus. And this morning, this is all centered around verse 14, which there are many called, but few are chosen. So as we start off, kind of break this thing up a little bit. Would anyone mind reading 1 through 6, and then I'll have someone else maybe finish 7 through 14? Break it up a little. Matthew 22 will be in 1 through 14. If I have anyone that's willing to read 1 through 6, and then someone else for 7 through 14. Okay. All right, anybody willing to finish out up to verse 14 there? Go ahead, Dale.
The king was angry, and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned the city. Then he said to the servants, the wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out to the roads and gathered all whom they found, bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there was a man who had no wedding garment. And they said to him, Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, Bind him hand and foot, and cast him into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen.
All right, there we go. So last verse, kind of where we're centering everything around. But so first of all, just to kind of kick it off, you know, I'm sure most have heard this parable a few times, but just general ideas, anything kind of jumping out to you as we go through the parable, or anything maybe this morning, even reading it again, that maybe jumps out that you didn't really catch before?
I think for me, that when I first became a Christian and got my first Bible, I had written a little note in the margin to myself that I kind of think about from time to time because I had a very limited understanding. But I thought everybody's called. God desires for all men to come to him. And so where it says, for many are called, but few are chosen, I said, rather, few choose.
Ah, okay.
But now I still kind of think about that. You know, is that just my immature understanding of Scripture? Because doesn't God choose all people to be Christians, but only few choose him?
Following? He's on it right there. No, that's a great start, and obviously, you know, a lot of what we're talking is going around that too. So how we kind of look at that verse, and you know, so I think we'll kind of dig into a little bit more of that as we get along in that. But no, that's a, like we said, it's a tough teaching. Like what is it that we're looking at? Yeah, Dale.
If you think about it, when this was said, it's referring to the Jews. Christ preached first to the Jews, and then to the Gentiles. So the Jews refused him.
Yep.
There's the Gentiles told him, and even some of those weren't chosen, but it says few were chosen.
Yeah.
So, you know, some people think they're in, and they're not.
Yep. Another one of those ones. I'll tell you guys, you know, I was talking to Roger on the way here, and this is something that Jason had given me, I think back in June, to fill in for. So I've been through it. I've read it. I don't know how many times, and every time I read it, something else different jumps out. So I finally got to this week, and I had to start taking all the notes I had everywhere and start streamlining an outline. So I don't know where class will go this morning or anything else, but I might have to start flipping back some of those old notes. So that's a good thing. That's what we were talking about earlier. You know, is I don't want to lecture through a class because I don't know what you're going to also get out of it. So who knows which direction we go out of it. All right, anything else? Anyone else have anything kind of jumped out to them or they thought was a little bit different or when you hear this parable? Yeah.
I was online this past week and there was this fella who was adamant about predestination. And he said, well, notice what I do, God's already decided who's going to go and who isn't going to go. And of course, my feeling is that yes, God is going to offer to everybody salvation. That's His grace. His grace is to offer to everybody. But there's only going to be a few that accept that gift. Any person that you run into that wants to give a gift, it's under a condition. Even if that gift is, all you have to do is reach out and give.
Yeah.
Something that simple. Everybody has a condition in which to give a free gift. And that was my reply.
Yeah. Now, it's a lot of good points, and we're going to get through, hopefully, get into that, going through this thing, too. I just wonder, because at the end, if we have some time, too, and maybe after we talk a little bit, is if there's any ideas or comments after we kind of go through this parable, some that maybe will jump out or you didn't think about in the many numerous times we've heard this parable in the past. So we'll kind of get into things a little bit here. Obviously, any of Jesus' teachings for all of us, you know, so here's a parable. It's laid out for us all today, but I think about the audience at the time. Who's Jesus kind of directing this parable at that point in time? Right? The religious leaders. You know, if you go through just after verse 14, I think it's in 15 or 16, it goes back to, you know, he was talking about the Pharisees. And if you look at the ending of chapter 21, you know, he's responding to those religious leaders at the time. Obviously, there's still a lot of teaching for us as we go through it and every time we look at it, but when we look at the religious leaders of the time, you know, I think about that as Jesus is teaching back to them and how they are responding to it. I just struggle to understand those who know the word so well and know those preachings and so forth of how lost we are that we don't have a relationship with him. And that's the one thing that really jumps out to me is, you know, I want to make sure that, because I think that's one of the tough preachings when I look at Matthew 7, verse 23, where he says, "Depart from me, for I never knew you." You know, that's another verse that we kind of go through and so forth, but I think about that in regards to these religious leaders that understand the word and teaching so well, but they never seek to have that relationship with him, that in the final days, he's going to say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." Yeah. And, you know, I think, you know, me personally, that's probably the biggest scripture, you know, Ryan was talking about before class, and then Tim brought that up too, just some of those teachings that we get. That's probably the one that really sticks with me the most too, is how I can know you, but depart from me. And then I started thinking about it, and it's just me, and you know, Angie might go with me a little bit on this one, but I think along the lines, for me to understand this would be like me going up to Michael Jordan's house and knocking on the door and be like, "Hey, I know you." And he's going to say, "You know, you're not invited into Thanksgiving. I have no idea who you are." So to me, that's what's kind of like sticks with me, is that I can know someone, but you don't have a relationship with them, right? You're not getting invited to a Thanksgiving dinner at Michael Jordan's house or Larry Bird's house. You just, I knew it was coming.
You know me better than this. Okay, continue.
But I think about that, and I really think about, where we're at in the world today, that so many believe that there is a Christ, but they're not seeking a relationship with him, and just how lost that could be in regards to that. And that's what really sticks out to me with the religious leaders, that you can know the word, you can know the scriptures, they have it memorized, but they just don't have a relationship. Nothing's changed in their heart to that point.
If you look at the verse before in chapter 21 and the verse after the 14th, he's talking to the Pharisees.
Yep.
Now, this is part of the Galilean ministry that he's in. He's not even in Judea yet. But the Pharisees are following him around. He's up in Galilee. There's another country between Judea and Galilee where he is now. And already they're looking for ways to kill him.
To trap him, and it just goes on and on in regards to. But yeah, that's the crazy things that I think about the two biggest commandments is love Christ and love your neighbor, and just how that can fix so much. At the same time, how not doing that, like nothing else really matters at that point. No matter how well we know the word or memorize the scriptures or anything else like that. So that's what really sticks out to me when I start to think about these parables and who, yes, they're directed towards the Pharisees and the scribes that we see in the verse before and the verse right after what we just read. But at the same time, these parables and the teachings are still for us today, and they have a lot of meaning in us studying them. Obviously, as we, so many of those parables, one day I can look at myself and put myself at one point. Then the next time we do the teaching of a parable, I can look at myself and say, there's probably times that I could be in that camp then too, and to really just kind of evaluate and make sure that the walk that I have is the correct walk then too, because I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm a sinner and I do have plenty of problems. So I could be in different camps and really just have to get back to where I should be at. As we start rolling through this thing then too, in verse 3, so I think it's important to kind of see who some of the audience is and maybe the parable. But in verse 3, so first of all, as the king is, let me get back up there too. It talks about the king sending out his servants or slaves, whichever translation you might have. So who would the king be? Who's the king? And then I'm going to ask who the slaves or the servants would be too.
King is God.
Okay. All right. So the king is the King of Kings, and that's the easiest way there. All right, the King of Kings. How about the servants or the slaves? Who's being sent out? Who might that be in this story? Or in this parable? I shouldn't say story. A story is something that didn't take place or, whatever else. So in this parable.
Isn't it just like humans in general?
Okay. Okay, so we can be the disciples. Okay, the apostles. I think about the prophets too. The prophets that were sent out to spread the word also.
The first ones he sent out were the 70 and 2 by 2s. The prophets, of course, went out and spoke for God.
Yeah.
Yes, EJ, so I guess what I meant is that the people so you have the people that got sent out, and then everyone else, like humankind in general, is like the people that they're trying to get to. That's what I'm saying.
Trying to, yeah. And again, I think there's times in this parable we can kind of look at it going through there, but, could be the disciples, could be the apostles, could be us today, could be the prophets. Because I was thinking about the disciples part, and then I'm like, well, one of those things is that when this parable is being taught, the disciples are still with him. You know, we know in the story what happens to his slaves and servants. So I'm like, you know, would it be that we're talking about the prophets? But then we kind of look at how this parable kind of goes, and it just depends on how you're depicting it too. Is this something that's coming in the future that he's speaking about? You know, and he's given the Pharisees and the Jews at the time a chance to really reflect and look back on where they're at. You know, but there's times that as he's teaching to them, man, they're just getting fired up. So it's not that they're taking inventory and where they're at in their lives, but you know, they're taking offense to the teachings, and it's just crazy because we talk about how well they know and understand the word in the first place. You know, but then I think about Psalm 22 when Christ is hanging on the cross, you know, and with everything that's going on for those that can memorize the scriptures, but you see Psalm 22, and of all people that should understand what was happening when Christ was on the cross, they still miss the picture of those events. Even as Christ starts to, his final words are pretty much, you know, starting off Psalm 22, you know, and like it still just doesn't quite go together. Daniel.
I think I look at it as we can see it's two groups. I look at it more of John the Baptist.
Okay.
They went ahead and he said, hey, it's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. The feast is here. Come to the feast. He's there all the time. And they, just like this parable, went ahead and got him, killed him.
Yep.
And Jesus says, no, for God.
That was another one I was brought up in some of the commentary that I was going through looking at class this morning too. So another good one to look at. All right, so we looked at, you know, who the king is, you know, Scott gave that to us. I don't think there's a whole lot to interpret around that, but then we can kind of look at the slaves or the servants, and, you know, it could be a couple different parties and possibilities that we're looking at there. And then as we finish up, I think it's verse 3, maybe starting off from verse 4 there. Oh, the ending of verse 3, that they refuse to come. So they're invited. You know, I just think about that picture too. Can you imagine the king and being invited to the castle to be part of this grand banquet, and they refuse to come at that point? Like, you know, I don't know. It struggles to me, but then I go back to that idea of, could I be in that camp? You know, there's a mansion waiting for us all, you know, and there's still times that I struggle to prepare myself for that mansion, you know, and I miss that at times. So there's sometimes I can read through that parable and I think, man, how are they not getting it? Then there's times I can read through and go, man, why am I not getting this? You know, why would I be in that same camp at that point? The great banquet is waiting. I won't say I refuse to come. There's dumb things that I do, and that's kind of where we're getting ready to go at here with the next thing. But it's just funny because, well, I shouldn't say funny. It's not funny. But they refuse to come. It almost sounds like a childish statement. You know, if you're trying to get your kids out of the house, they go to church on a Sunday morning, they won't get dressed, and it's, you know, it's that you're trying to drag them on out the house. I mean, that's where my mind goes to when I read that verse. Not that I had small kids and we ever had to do that. Never happened. Yes. Yes, the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And it's, yeah. That's a hard one. I mean, it's right there. It's right there. The invitation's waiting right there for us. And there's times that we just go in, you know, I shouldn't say we. I will go in a different direction. Maybe you guys are with me on that one or not. But I think this next verse here. Then he sent more servants and said, tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. So here, when I read this, he's not going to a different group. he's going back to the same group. He didn't say, hey, forget these guys. No, he says, return to them and tell them everything's ready. I got it all prepared. All right? So here we are being invited to the king's castle. Only thing we got to do is show up. Everything's been butchered. You had me at that point. You know, if it was me, we have steaks and we're going to the castle. Then I think, man, I still don't get that right at times, you know? Even all that stuff's been prepared, I still get misguided and go in a different direction. So here we are. You know, he's saying, go back to the same group. You know, so I think it shows us, you know, what Scott said, it's the King of Kings. You know, he's unwilling at this point. Even after they said, no, we're not, you know, we refuse to go. He says, no, return to them. You know, let them know everything's prepared. Just show up. It's all here for you. I have it laid out. I had down my notes that, you know, he even, you know, we got to the point now where he's trying to bribe us. Like, hey, there's fat and cattle. I got the oxen. Everything's here. You know, come on in. And then what happens? So this is where it kind of hits me a little bit too. But they paid no attention and went off. One to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. So I just think about this as, you know, maybe sometimes I glaze over this because when I see that they mistreated the servants or the slaves and killed them, you know, beat them, that's the point that usually jumps out to me. I'm like, you know, I think Daniel said it was probably a month ago in one of the classes, we started talking about legalism, you know, and he made a comment along the lines, well, at least I'm not that bad. You know, I think sometimes when I read that scripture, like my mind just automatically goes to, I wouldn't do anything like that. But who starts off that? But they paid no attention, went off to their fields and their businesses. Now at that point, there's times I get distracted, right? I've been invited, I have everything that's laid out for me. Only thing I got to do is show up, and the things of the world will distract me and pull me away from that invitation, what's waiting there for me. In that word or in that verse, if you guys kind of know that the group of people, all that stuff just kind of blends in together. Some were distracted, they went away, they did their own thing. Other ones mistreated the servants who were sent for them. You know, so then I think about what happens on the cross. I wouldn't have put a nail through his wrist, but I held him on the cross by my actions. You know, so I think sometimes, you know, just the human nature that's in us, you know, I think about the legal part, you know, and that catches me so often that I would think, well, I wouldn't do that. But I might as well put the nail through his wrist because I held him there. He had to stay on the cross because of the sins that I have. You know, so then I look at this parable, and sure enough, I wouldn't have mistreated or killed him, but you know, is there times that I'm distracted by what's going on in the world around me that would have pretty much been the same thing, that I didn't show up, I didn't want to go to the wedding banquet that the king has prepared for us.
There's a song, I'm talking about the cross, there's a song that says, were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about that for a long, long time, and I thought, yeah, I was there. My sins put me there.
Yeah.
So the answer for us today is we were there.
We held him there, we kept him there. He could have got up and walked away at any point, but he didn't because of you and me.
I think we could send to like murderers up here and lying
Mm-hmm.
down here.
Yep.
Where that's not what God said. Sin is sin. Like so.
That always sticks to me. I can't remember the classes. It's funny when you go through a class and so forth, and hopefully, you know, it's not always about the teacher, and definitely this morning it's not about the teacher, but there's comments that come up during class, or there could be something to link back, and just that one, when Daniel was talking about that, that's what stuck out to me from class. Like, man, I do that. There's times I look at it and I'm like, man, I'm not that bad. But no, you know, in his eyes, sin is sin. I mean, that's why he went to the cross. So. All right, any other comments off that?
I just want to maybe point out that we have a lesson in evangelism here. When we are Christians, we all are evangelists. And are we inviting people to something positive by the way we
Gotcha.
live our lives?
Yeah.
Or are we saying, hey, come join me in this really awful thing? It's just such a, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, we grumble and complain.
Yeah.
Some of that might just be us complaining about how things work at the church, or just, I feel like it can come out in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It talks here about, hey, come join us for this really wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And other places we read, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It doesn't say Christianity is small or terrible, or, you know, do we all go through trials in this world? Sure. But I don't know, I just want to point that out.
No, that's a good point. It's we had a preacher when we went to Wapak that said, you know, it's hard to follow a Christian around that looked like he's been winged on a dill pickle. So he's a Southern preacher. Jeff might get a little bit more of that saying or not, but yeah, that's what, you know, to have that sourpuss look on your face, like, who wants to go with you? You know, we always joke around when you smell something and you're like, man, this smells terrible. Smell it. No, I don't want to smell it. I mean, if it smells terrible, or hey, try this out. It tastes awful. Okay, no, you know, yeah, same thing though.
So, like, part of my religious journey was a long time ago. I read the book A Case for Christ, and then A Case for Christ has like a lot of people in it that journalist interviews that are like experts at certain things. And so, what I'm talking about right now is like there's a guy in that book called Craig Blomberg. Like, what I did is I went and I read A Case for Christ, and then I got so interested in that I like started researching hard all the people he interviewed. And so, a really, really like hard book to read because it's like a graduate level book is Craig Blomberg has a book called Interpreting Parables. And he talks specifically about this parable.
Yeah.
And so like, I wanted to give you a synopsis kind of like on what he talks about that always, like this parable hits me hard. He's talking about the garmentless guest. That person represents the insider who assumes that they belong in that place, but they're not qualified to be there. And that's always been something that like I read years ago from Craig Blomberg in this like uber difficult book. But that's one thing that always spoke to me because I feel like that's like from our perspective, right? Like from somebody that like practices and stuff, is it's like I worry all the time about like I don't want to be that person, right? Like I don't want to be the person that like gets there and thinks they belong but like didn't do the right thing.
Yeah.
And so like that's always been an explanation of that one, because I would be like, oh, this guy like came to your party, you asked him, and then like he gets thrown into the darkness because he doesn't have the right garment. Like how stupid is that? Like that here, I think that we skipped that part of the parable. It's like no. Like,
No, I have it.
Yeah. Why didn't you know it? But that's what Blomberg's like interpretation is, and that to me has always been like the most powerful part of this whole entire thing. And I thought that like we were at the guest, and so I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. That's why I started class off with anyone that kind of had to kind of see where your thinking was around the parable. So.
And then I would encourage anybody to like find that book. It's like not very expensive, like on Audible or whatever, and it is kind of different. The first 2/3 of it are hard because he's talking about like the difference between like allegories and metaphors.
Oh
He
yeah,
gets, like,
okay.
really, like literal about like what people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I had a 13 on my English ACT, so that's not that's not for me.
But once you get to like where he's talking about the parables specifically, it's pretty cool. Like that's like he's like theologically, like if you're somebody like me that didn't understand all the parables, he really comes at you not from his opinion, but like this is generally like what he kind of does some work for you. That's like, hey, for the last 500 years, this is what people have thought about this parable. This is like generally kind of like what it means, and then he's like, this is what I think about it.
No, it's a good point. I mean, I joke around about my ACT score, so, but to have someone that kind of help breaks it down, to get the meaning behind it too, because sometimes that can get lost. But no, it's a great point to have. All right, so trying to jump into it here, and to Ryan's point, there's a lot of good stuff at the end. I'm getting held up here in the middle with some of this, which is still good stuff, don't get me wrong. But yeah, who killed the slaves? Well, if we look at the slaves or servants, however yours is printed out, but in Matthew 29 through 36, it talks about the brood of vipers and so forth that had killed the prophets. So again, he's going after the Pharisees and scribes. So just to kind of tie that in, I won't spend a whole lot of time, but I do want to throw that in to kind of understand as we put this whole thing together. Verse 8 then, we get into those who are invited are not worthy. So then the invitation is sent out to the Gentiles, right? First to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. And as we look at that scripture and the meaning behind it, the thing I want to point out too is if you go to Matthew 8, you don't have to jump there. But in Matthew 8, 5 through 13, we read about the centurion. And to be in a situation where, he had told Christ, like, hey, you don't need to come with me. If you speak the words, we know it'll happen, and where Christ was at, to, as Jesus said, the amount of belief and faith that he found in him. But as we go through that preaching that went along with it, if we look at verses 11 and 12, it says, many will be at the table, but will not be included the sons of the kingdom. So again, we kind of look at where we're at here as we go back to the wedding banquet. Those who are invited to be at the table are not going to be there. So the first, the Jews that had the opportunities first, and then it just gets to me because then I start to think about Romans 11, 17 through 24, and Josh isn't in here, so it's been kind of good. But I think about those who are grafted in, right? So we have the parable of the grapevine, and how the dead branches are being removed off of the vine, and there's other wild shoots that are growing up alongside of it. It's getting grafted in, and I thought maybe Josh should be in here that can kind of speak about what happens when that tree has a diseased branch. I mean, you got to remove it before it infects the whole tree from that standpoint. So I think about the sons who had the inheritance, and how can you have the inheritance taken away from you at that point. So those are a couple scriptures that really jump out to me as we start looking at that. All right, so getting on to where Ryan was at, because I think it's an important part to understand. So verses, where are we at? 11, I do believe now. I got to get back into 22, make sure we get the right verses. We talk about the clothing. Yep, and 11. All right, so as we start talking about the individual who was in the banquet who didn't have the proper wedding clothes on, a great conversation coming from that, but what's the representation of being at the wedding? And there's some other commentaries out there too about what it looks like. Because I've heard commentaries that at this point in time in history too, that if you're invited to the banquet, the king actually gives you wedding clothes. So everything is literally laid out for you. If we go along with that commentary, that he's already told us that the food, the feast, the only thing you got to do is show up. Well, in this commentary too, they're talking about at that point in time in history that the wedding clothes are even ready for you. The only thing you got to do is show up and put them on. So here we have someone who didn't even have the wedding clothes on. What's your representation, or what does that kind of mean to you? Ryan kind of hit on it too. Is there anything else that I got a couple scriptures that I would throw in?
One thing that hits me about this is the person didn't have on the right wedding clothes. Everybody's going to pay attention to him instead of what really is important.
Okay. kind of a distraction then at that point in time. All right. Let me make sure this is the right one. I'm in Galatians 3. I'm sorry. Does anyone else have anything around the wedding clothes? Oh, yeah, Scott.
So he's not wearing wedding clothes. What is he wearing?
Okay.
His own righteousness.
Yep.
See, and that is blasphemy to the Holy Spirit, the unforgivable sin. When you look to your righteousness to get you into the feast, the garment is Christ, Christ alone. And what keeps so many people from attending the pews? Well, when you come in, you live as good as us, and you follow it as good as us, we'll let you know you're welcome. When you reject Christ's sacrifice, because the focus gets put on what we have done. See? So that is ultimately the saddest part of it, right there. Is he's relying on his own righteousness.
On his own, yes.
So when we start saying, well, at least I'm not that bad, or I haven't done this, or I haven't done that, when the Sermon on the Mount raises the bar and says you don't forgive, you're the same as a murderer, Christ means it. If you look lustfully on a woman, you're guilty of adultery, 5:28. Christ means it. So
Yeah,
the
hatred
standard
in your
is
heart.
raised so high that no one can obtain it. All you have is Christ crucified, which is the message, the gospel, that needs to be taken to a hurting and unbelieving world, people that we have so rejected, that seem so unsavable, the drug addict, the trans, the homosexual, all these people that we think are simply not savable. I am guilty of thinking this way. But we need to re-examine that and look past us and put on him and preach him love.
Yeah. I think too, I think sometimes when we pray, let me see others as you see others. I mean, that can be a difficult thing, to what you're talking about, Scott. It's a difficult thing for me to understand at times too, to be able to do that.
Just real quick, because I didn't want to finish up, but to me it looked like, even now, if you invite somebody to church, they come to church every day of the week, doing the supposed to read the Bible, but they refuse to get baptized, then what did you accomplish?
Yeah.
You come to the wedding, but you are not baptized, so.
Doing it on your own terms.
Yeah, so you're.
Yeah. Kind of going along with you guys, the verse I had down was Galatians 3. And in 27, it says, "For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ." And then we also can pull up Romans 13. I believe it's 12 at that point, where he talks about putting on the armor of Christ. And he even talks about living in the light, which is another thing here as we get to the end of the parable, or end of time, one or the other, but they're both going to hit us here. So let me jump into that part as we try to, I want to make sure. So he tells them then to take them and throw them into the outer darkness. The word for outer darkness comes up 3 times here in Matthew. So the Hebrew word for it was Gehenna, and it comes up 3 times, and it's the divide or the lake of fire that's translated. And so it pops up 3 times in Matthew. Once was in Matthew chapter 8. That the translation is not the same, so it's not the same word used. But here we are in 22, and the outer darkness was translated from Gehenna, which is divide and the lake of fire. So I want to throw that in as we looked at that part. Now as we talk about the wedding banquet, if we're at the wedding banquet, who's being married at that point? All right. I try to give you an easy one out there. So thank you, Scott. So thank you. Yeah, obviously, we're you know, the King of Kings is inviting us to a marriage banquet. You know, we're looking at Christ being married to the bride, who is the church. So again, here we are in the story, and if we can, in Revelations 17 and verses 7 through 9, I just want to give that to you real quick as we. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides." I got the wrong verse, sorry. Revelations 19. Yeah, we should be in 19. I was reading 17, so I'm sorry. Revelations 19, verse 7 says, "Let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory, for the wedding of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. Fine linen, bright and clean, was given her to wear." So obviously, as we also talk about the linen and the clothing that we'll have on at that time, but what the wedding is a celebration of is looking at who's been invited into the kingdom above, and who had the opportunities and who's taking advantage of those opportunities. So obviously, when we talked about the parable, you know, it's a lot of answering where we're at the end of 21 of who he's kind of directing those to. But obviously, the parable teachings and the way it's in there is for us, even to this day, that we can get something out of those teachings and understand that we're still a part of that story, where we place ourselves at and where we don't want to be placed at. But the wedding banquet is open to all. Do we have the right clothes on? Are we in a relationship that we look to seek and come to that banquet? It's all been prepared for us. It's laid out for us. But as we finish up in 14, when we read that, you know, we're all called, but a few are chosen, is what that means. As our relationship with Christ is, as it's open, it's there for us all. It gives us the opportunity to come and freely eat and to be there in that castle, that mansion above. As we finish up, I'm a couple minutes over, but I said at the start, I kind of, you know, as we went through, is there anything maybe you heard others say or something from the parable that maybe jumped out to you this time that hits different, sounds different, have a different meaning? Nothing else? All right. Well, thank you guys for your comments, getting us through that, and I appreciate it this morning as we looked at Matthew 22:14, but thank you.